Welcome back, everyone, to another Change Your Game with GTD podcast. My name is Robert Peake. I'm here with Todd Brown.
Hello, everyone.
Hey, Todd. So, once again, this series is designed to help you figure out how to get a little more done with a little less stress, help you to tease out and explore that idea that there may be a smarter way to work, that it may be possible to be more effective without necessarily taking on more stress and strain in your life, that in fact that you can work in a more frictionless, graceful way by thinking about how you work rather than just putting in more effort all the time. We had a topic come in recently from one of our listeners, or possibly now one of our viewers, now that we're also doing video podcasts, asking about information overload and the fear of missing out. I love this acronym, FOMO, fear of missing out. That's certainly something that I've experienced, in the constant barrage of opportunities, what I've heard David Allen himself call the stress of infinite opportunity, or what feels like infinite in the information age. What about you, Todd? Have you experienced that sense of fear of missing out? And if so, what have you done that helps?
Yeah, I think it's incredibly timely. I think I'm just reminded of an article that I read about someone who lives in the Bay Area in San Francisco, and he apparently had calculated exactly. He went through a train tunnel as part of his commute, and he calculated down to the second how long he was going to be in the train tunnel every day and what that implied in terms of and it was literally measured in seconds. It was like 43 seconds or something he was in this train tunnel. But this was an issue for him, that he thought in that period of time he would be missing something significant. So I know it's an issue for a lot of people. That's an extreme example, of course, but I know it's an issue for a lot of people. And I think it's fascinating. I think GTD has an awful lot to say in this area. I think, what drives what we choose to capture, what we choose to allow into our lives is an interesting question, right? And I think an awful lot of people are, just because of the fact that they're so used to being overwhelmed by the number of ins that they're receiving, that they sort of have this sense that, well, that's kind of the way that the world is. So part of what we would recommend would be, as one application of all of this thinking is, hey, look, let's have a really let's do a really deep dive into what you're allowing in. And what I mean by that very tactically is, let's have a look at your inbox, for example, and let's look at all of the things that you could unsubscribe for. What are all the groups you could leave? What are, how could we reduce the things that really are noise, that email list that you subscribed to years ago, all the content's available online. You don't really read them when they come in. You just kind of delete them or maybe leave them in your inbox, but they're not relevant anymore. So if and again, if you really needed the content, you could find it online. Those kinds of decisions, I think a lot of people have deferred, with the result that they've got, they're faced with a fire hose of inputs every day. Some initial thoughts from me. What do you reckon?
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right, that there is this kind of fire hose out there, and that it's interesting. I think there's maybe a little bit of a misconception in some of this, that the overwhelm comes from the things that you don't know, meaning the things that you might miss out on, that are out there, that could come in to the inbox. And of course, there's this incredible random reward reinforcement that happens with all the notifications and pop-ups and different ways that technology tries to get our attention, because every once in a while it is interesting and exciting and useful and relevant information. But in my experience working with a lot of people now, a lot of the overwhelm comes from what you don't know, meaning the stuff that is in there that hasn't really been fully clarified, that you do know you want to do something about and you are committed to in some way. So I think there should be a greater fear on missing out on the things are important and meaningful, and that you really ought to be doing to create a happy, successful life for yourself, then the fear of missing out on, that special offer on, tickets to a concert that could come down the pike or not someday. It's like there's that sense that the new thing, the shiny new thing that comes in, is going to necessarily be more important. And sometimes it is important, but if you're not clear on your baseline of what you've already agreed to do and said you'd do and so forth, that's where I find people really lose sleep. That's where I find people really feel overwhelmed, is with what they've been given that they haven't appropriately clarified and structured and organized in their world such that they can have confidence that they'll do it. You're missing out on stuff that matters, in order to, potentially be ready for something, that could, in theory, be more important. Deal with what is kind of one of my, suggestions and all of that. I think a lot of people, because there's a constant stream of stuff coming our way, we're more orientated toward the new, what's new, what's happening, than toward what we already know is valuable and important. I think that's a really interesting, interesting phenomenon in our modern age. I don't know. Does that resonate?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, you don't get a dopamine hit from opening that Excel spreadsheet to do some really heavy thinking on that project that you've been avoiding for 6 weeks, right? Whereas you do get a dopamine hit every time you open an app that has a little, red dot on it that says there are 18 new messages here, right? So I think on the one hand, it's understandable, but, in some cases, I'd say we should be easy on ourselves to the extent that we, that we engage in these behaviors as unproductive as they are. But at the same time, I think your point's a great one. I'm also reflecting on the fact that I don't know if you saw about the information about the new the Apple launch that happened this week and the new features that are coming out in the latest version of iOS, where people are going to be able to choose when they're interrupted, choose what they're notified about. They're going to be, in essence, my sense is that what Apple is allowing people to do is selectively, turn off their technology to a certain extent, or certainly make their technology less intrusive in people's lives. And I think that's, again, it's a reflection of a conversation that I think is going on in the broader world, which is that we've been kind of swimming in this new technology now. In the 10, 11 years since the first smartphones came out, we've been living in this world where we've been kind of trying to figure out what all of this means for us. And as more and more of the negative implications have become clear, suddenly now you're seeing the technology companies, and I think the Apple launch was a good example of this, recognizing this and starting to accommodate the fact that people don't want to be interrupted all the time. Just another practical application of this thinking that comes to mind is, go through your settings on your mobile device and turn off the notifications for any apps where you're thinking, I don't really need to know that there's a new posting from the app that I've gotten from my local bus company telling me about a change to the schedule or whatever. Be selective about the things that you allow yourself to be notified by. There are more. To sum it all up, I think you can probably miss out on more things than you think if you just give it some some consideration and think about, I do want to be kept up to date on the important stuff, but I don't want that to mean that my life is just completely suffused with noise.
Yeah, and I think that's a good way to put it, is noise. So in engineering, we talk about this signal to noise ratio, which means how much the good stuff is coming through the channel versus how much of just stuff that's sort of static, when it actually shows up. And I think you're absolutely right that reducing inputs, unsubscribing, making sure that those noisy channels get out of your world is really important. It's also really important, I think, to be clear about what channels you are willing to take input, how people work with you. I was working with someone recently who had almost a dozen different channels where people could provide input to him. And being kind of a young, hip tech startup, one of the things that the kind of younger generation of programmers would do is put business critical information into one of their kind of hangout social media type channels in the company. And to me, this is the kind of behavioral equivalent of, dropping the new business strategy around the water cooler, as we're all just kind of hanging out and chatting. It's like, no, that's not the ideal format to get that in there, to get everyone's, to be thinking about this very actionable, very important piece of information. So he's working on, training up his team to say, look, email is the primary place, and I'll scan some of these things from time to time. But if you've got something you really need me to do and see, here's my inbox. Here's the place where I'm expecting a high signal to low noise ratio to be happening here. And I think that's important too, as technology is just, there are more and more channels trying to push information to us, partly because they can frankly push advertising to us as well if they can get us onto that channel. But also because there's certain convenience factors and other things about the format it comes in. As that has just kind of grown exponentially, I think it's really important to get clear about, what do I check and when, and when I go to check a channel, am I ready for new input, or is it not appropriate? I should actually be working on the stuff that I've already clarified. Our managing partner Ed, his take on the whole iOS thing was, I have a power switch, right? I just use the power button on my phone. I turn the thing off completely. I go to bed, right? Of course, he has a good practice of regularly emptying out his inboxes, clarifying those new inputs into a trusted system, and so he knows that the new stuff can actually wait a while. It can wait till I wake up. It's after hours, and I can just have a meal, which I think is really, really important. There's a lot of things, I think, in the GTD methodology that help us with this fear of missing a signal in the midst of all the noise. What are some of the more practical things that you've found, Todd, that help you anyway to increase signal, reduce noise, make sure you're not missing anything, but also not just bombarded by nonsense?
Yeah, I think I just build on something that you said, which is this idea that the number of channels that you need to check, right? So the place where the new things come in, having a conversation with the team about what your standards are about those various channels, I think is really critical. And these are conversations that very few organizations have had. So sit down with your team and say, okay, our standard for email is what? If we send an email to each other, what's the standard? How long will it be at a maximum before that email gets seen? And agree that, is it an hour? Is it 6 hours? Is it 5 days? What's the standard? And then say, okay, we need now to have an escalation path. And by the way, it's not just email, right? It's Slack, or it's Trello, or it's whatever you're using in terms of shared, kind of communications and places where new inputs might show up. Again, I think those conversations are critical, and there are very few organizations that have had them. But just to come back to the email point, so if then let's say that the standard is 6 hours. If I send an email to somebody on the team, they will have seen it within 6 hours, and acknowledged receipt, or if the work is quick to do, maybe they've responded with what it was I needed, but they've at the very least seen it and responded. In those situations, I think what's kind of interesting is, the point is, if you also need an escalation, right? So you need quicker ways to get in touch with people in case, if somebody says, I need you now, then let's agree. How does that happen? Is that a text message? Do you have some sort of internal instant messaging system that you're going to use? What are the channels which we are going to be keeping an eye on, because they mean, because our agreement there is that this is for the really important stuff. Am I gonna call you, right? It could be another possibility to go real old school. But again, I think the organizations that have had those conversations and agreed those standards are organizations that tend to operate with less interpersonal friction, because there isn't a mismatch of standards and expectations about how those channels are being used.
Yeah, I think that's really, really valuable to have the conversation. We need to talk, about how we use all these different channels, and how we can trust each other more, that we're not going to miss something, as a team, as an organization. One of the things that is one of my kind of other favorite acronyms that's come forward recently, in addition to FOMO and YOLO, is TL semicolon DR, which is too long, didn't read. You know, as a poet, as someone who both values literature tremendously and the act of reading as an artistic experience, and also values concision, right? Like, you know, I've too have gotten those emails that have buried the lead, right? The actual actionable thing is 12 paragraphs down. I can appreciate in our modern age that there is more text to consume and more stuff that we could read, and that accounts too for videos we could watch, audio we could listen to, etc., than any one of us has lifetimes to be able to consume. So one of the things that really helps me with the combination of fear of missing out and information overload is to have this category of thing that involves stuff that I might like to peruse, but that I'm not actively committed to having to peruse, right? If I have to read something, it's part of a project, it's part of something I'm doing, that's in my actionable system. But if it's this kind of thing where I go, oh, that would be really interesting, my read and review system, my read and review set of folders and tools is absolutely invaluable to keep me on task and on point, right? Because I just have a lot of interest, and this link comes through and this thing, and I go, wow, I could easily spend a very happy hour reading all about, you know, these new machine learning algorithms for natural language processing. But that's not really my job today. That's not really what I'm supposed to be doing. So getting it into either a read and review folder in my email, or lately I've been using, just for URLs, a tool called Pocket, where you can just click a little button and it collects basically lots of different web pages in one place, in one bucket, that I just consider read and review. It's been hugely helpful because it helps me kind of navigate that thing of, well, I don't want to totally miss this. I don't want to totally let this go because it's interesting, but it's not strictly actionable and relevant to what I need to get done today. And it's not really something I need to put in my system as part of an action or a project that I'm completely actively committed to. So that's one of the ones that's a safety relief valve for me, along with, of course, the someday maybe list, is getting clear about what level of commitment you have to the information as it comes in. And if you don't know that, you're guaranteed to be missing out on some stuff, because you haven't decided in a way what matters and what doesn't. You haven't done any kind of filtering on that fire hose. So that's one that helps me, certainly. I don't know if I think you use your tools similarly for that.
Yeah, I think one of the things that I've advised a lot of clients over the years is to make a distinction. I think keeping on top of reading, let's just put it that way, right? Things that we should read is an interesting one, and I think one very clear, a clean edge, as we say in GTD, that's helpful for a lot of people is the distinction between what I call read for information, which is sort of self-developmental. It's, hey, that would be interesting. It would be good to know about more about that, versus read for response, which is somebody's counting on me for this. This is something that, you know, I'm part of some sort of a workflow, or I have made a commitment to somebody that I'm going to get back to them with feedback or whatever, right? So that's just one way to organize reading material, but I do that myself, and I've recommended that to other people, and I think that makes a big difference, because there's so much coming at us. Again, you know, as we are gathering things, as things are coming at us, I think a lot of people end up with a huge stack, whether that's a literal physical stack or whether it's a digital stack of some kind of things to read, and being able to say, well, there's a fundamental difference in my commitment here. This stuff I gotta read because I'm on the hook to read it, and other people are expecting something from me. And this stuff, yeah, it's important, and I'd like to get to it, but that starts to feel more someday maybe, right? The more for a lot of people, that kind of thing, you know. And I think the other thing, just to draw a line under that, would be just to make sure that those, whichever mechanism you use for keeping track of reading, that that you're pretty ruthless about getting rid of stuff that is no longer relevant, that it either gets filed for reference, in which case, you know, you're saying, well, I might read that in the future, but really at this point, I'm really just going to make it reference material, or you trash it and you just say, well, I had the best intentions in the world when I organized this to begin with, but it's just lost any relevance at this point.
Yeah, great distinction to really sharpen that up about the use of the different different types of potential reading categories you can use, because there's a lot of text out there.
Yeah.
Knowing whether it applies to you or not is a pretty big deal, and a lot of it comes in text. Great opportunities as well as spam.
And it doesn't have to be reading, right? It can be videos, it can be
Videos,
podcasts, it can be
audio,
whatever it is, right?
all of those media.
So consumables.
Consumable information. That's right.
Consumables,
Consumable information. Gosh, I hope my poems don't get referred to one day as consumable information. It's all over for us, Well, I think this is very much, in some ways, it's a problem of the developed world, right? It's like, well, what's the big deal? But I think there is a pretty big deal out there as people are stressing out and burning out, and the statistics about workplace health and well-being, start to show up that indicates, wow, we really are expecting a lot of people in terms of them being able to know what's signal and what's noise. So hopefully some of these things that we've talked about today can help you with that, can help you sort the wheat from the chaff, and also find ways to be kind to yourself and be conscious that that you can get on track and on top of all the stuff that you are actively committed to, which can hopefully give you a lot more, well, I know it does for me, a lot more confidence that the stuff that's coming at you can make good priority decisions about. Is this a drop everything? Is this a nice to read someday? Or is this something that can go in my system so I can keep focus on what I'm doing right now, even as these interruptions are coming at me? Any final tips, parting thoughts, Todd, about how to manage this crazy world we're in?
I think, and I'm going to date myself slightly here. I think back to the days of radios, ham radios, and shortwave radios, and I think about, there was this thing called the squelch dial, right? And the squelch dial, for those of you that haven't seen one, the radio had all kinds of background noise, and as you turned the squelch dial, what you basically said was you were filtering out that background noise. And so at some point you turn the knob and all the background noise would go away. And what I would say is, in general, just make sure that your squelch dial is turned up to a helpful level. Don't let yourself be capturing things that you really don't think are helpful. Those are the things you can miss out on and not feel any guilt or any stress about. Be a bit ruthless about that. And then, just use GTD best practices to handle all the other things, the things that you have chosen to let into your life. So those would be, I think, my top tips. How about you?
Yeah, that's great. I think too, with that, beware of the shiny new thing syndrome. That dopamine you get from the new cat video, that's not necessarily the highest priority thing in your world. And be aware that, to me, again, a lot of the stress doesn't come from what you don't know that could be out there. It comes from what you do know you don't know, from the stuff that hasn't been appropriately clarified, but is important, and you're committed to do something about. Get on top of that stuff. You're going to feel a lot better about the overall stream coming your way, because, as David said, you can only feel good about what you're not doing when you know what you're not doing, when you have that inventory. So hoping all of you are on your way more and further toward having that system you can trust to help you feel a little less of the fear and anxiety about missing out on stuff. So if any of this has resonated with you, we'd as always love to hear from you. This whole topic came from Mandy, so thanks for writing in and asking us to address this. Hopefully that's helped you. Do let us know. And if you have other topics, thoughts, things that you'd like us to cover, a la GTD and productivity and having greater sense of well-being and being in the moment and getting stuff done, being effective, we'd love to hear from you. info@next-action.eu, info@next-action.eu. So for now, thanks for being with us. We'll see you next time.